Hello, this is Major Donors for Dioceses, and I am Terry Mathis, Senior Program Director at the Episcopal Church Foundation. And I want to welcome all of you for a lively discussion about better ways to resource your diocese, your diocesan institutions, and I see we have a few parishes participating as well. This is what we'll cover today. ECF Mission, many of you have exposure to ECF, but we cover a lot of ground, so we're going to give you a quick little snapshot of everything that we do. How to identify and cultivate your donors. We'll discuss where to find your donors, how to prepare them and you for a major gift request. Then we'll look at some benchmarks for knowing whether your potential donor or prospect is ready to give and how much to ask them for a gift. Along the way, we will discuss the role of the bishop and what your donors have to say about their experience giving in the church. Now, if this has raised questions already, that's a good thing. Type them in the chat. We've all gotten a little practice with that already, and I will take those questions as we go along. We'll also have a few places to pause for questions. This is ECF's mission. We strengthen leadership because leadership is responsible for mission. We publish the Vestry Resource Guide and Vestry Papers, which have been reincarnated as ECF Vital Practices. And if you're not familiar with Vital Practices, I commend it to you. It's an online resource center. Go to ecfvp.org and see what other congregations are doing that's working, and you can copy. Our Fellows program makes grants to lay or clergy persons doing transformational work across the church, and we're piloting a new program called Vital Teams, which trains clergy and lay people to work together as teams. Now, strong mission and strong leaders tend to attract support. So ECF also teaches churches and institutions how to raise funds, discuss their use, and manage them responsibly and effectively. That means we offer workshops and webinars like this on stewardship training, planned giving. We manage parish and diocesan capital campaigns. We offer individual Episcopalians a wide range of planned giving instruments. We are the resource for planned giving in the Episcopal Church. And we assist congregations and dioceses in managing their endowments. ECF currently manages over $110 million in Episcopal endowment funds nationwide. We're going to talk a lot about mission today because mission attracts support, as I said. And if you focus on your mission, the funding will follow. So before we get started, let's do a couple of little polls that will help you, that will help me help you to identify where you are in your experience and fundraising process. So this first poll that's just appeared on the screen asks, what is the largest gift you have asked for? And the answers will pop up with no attribution. You can see somebody's asked for $5 million. Okay. Anybody else? 100,000, another 100,000. That's a really common number. 500, 4 million. We're just getting started. That's a good answer. Good. 37,000. Now that's an interesting number. 50,000, 30, new to fundraising. Well, we can help you. So we've got a couple of millions, quite a few in the 6 figures, and then a fair number in the 5 figures as well. Okay, now that's the most you've asked for. Now we're going to see what's the largest gift you've received. So we're going to close that poll and bring out the next poll. And go ahead and type in the largest amount that you've received. And then you'll see a little box right next to where you've typed the number that has an arrow that publishes it. All right. Notice now we're getting a fair number of 6-figure gifts. There's $1 million plus gift, $2.5 million, $2.8 million, 1.2 million. Whoops, 100K. Was that whoops that you got only 100K, or whoops that you typed in something more before that? A lot of six-figure gifts and a good number of five. Let's see, one or two, and 25,000, 20,000, 25,000. So what you'll see there is that what counts as a major gift, we can end that poll now, what counts as a major gift varies very widely among institutions and within an institution depending on where you are in your program development. You've got people who are just getting started and people who've been successful in asking for multi-million-dollar gifts. So we'll try to cover that whole gamut today. Obviously, the first thing that you need to do is identify your donors. Now, I'm going to go through a ton of statistics here in the next few minutes. You should have already gotten a PDF of this presentation. If you didn't, it will also be attached with the recording. So don't make yourself crazy trying to take down all these numbers. What we're doing here is defining the universe to get you started. Most of the statistics that I'm going to run through here were generated either by Giving USA, which is a report produced by the Center on Philanthropy at the University of Indiana, or from the 2012 Bank of America study on high net worth individuals. Now, what you see up here is very good news. Individuals are the largest slice of today's philanthropic market, and that's good news for churches because it's fairly uncommon for churches to get, say, corporate sponsorship. For major donors, there's even more good news. Half of the nearly $220 billion of charitable gifts from individuals came from the top 3% of all gifts. In other words, your major donors. Now, where do they give that? Again, this looks like good news. 31% of all giving goes to religious organizations. And many of those gifts come from high net worth donors, so your major donor prospects. Bank of America says that high net worth donors found that 65% of them gave to religion. So that's some more good news there. But it's also important to have the backstory here. In the mid-90s, the percentage given to religion was actually around 45%. And religion has been losing 1 to 3 percentage points of the charitable marketplace ever since. Now, most of that's been going to organizations like Public Society Benefits, Save the Children, Make-A-Wish, foreign aid like Oxfam or Care.org, or health organizations. So on the plus side, these are organizations that are doing the things that good Christians should do. Feed the hungry, care for the sick, lift up the poor. On the downside, the number of organizations has skyrocketed, 33% in the last 10 years alone. So just
Terry, I have a question.
heard, you have to get, we got a little bit of background noise there. Just to be heard over the extra message noise, you have to work harder and harder. And this is just one of the things that affects a diocese's ability to work with donors. But as you'll see, it's a really important one. The good news is there's a lot that you can do about it. Now, why do they give? There's been a tectonic shift in philanthropy in the past decade or so. As baby boomers, that's those people born after 1945, have come of age as leaders and philanthropists, they've brought a cultural shift that's impacted how Generation X and millennials have operated as well. Furthermore, in 2010, the last of the traditionalists, that's people who were born before 1946, retired. So your largest wage-earning cohort is now baby boomers and younger. And look at what defines their giving. Notice how much the language on the left still sounds pretty much like the average church stewardship language. We give out of God's abundance, which is subtle implication of duty. God gave it to you and now you owe it back. We even use terms like legacy to define our planned gifts or to talk about our capital campaign. Now look how much the language on the right reflects some of those public service organizations that I was talking to, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of impact and results. So remember that and come back to it. Now remember I said that 65% of high net worth donors gave to religion? Here we have even better news. 36% gave their largest gift to religion. Education comes in at 25%, and after that you drop off really quickly. This is from that Bank of America study. And I should mention that there's other research that indicates the mega gifts tend to go to health and education, but this gives you a sense of how unusual those are. We're going to unpack that a little bit. Now here's the largest gift by dollar amount, and this is where major gift work, people who are new to major gift work get their biggest surprise. Notice that overwhelmingly the largest gifts are between $2,000 and $5,000 or under $2,000. These gifts are overwhelmingly made to support annual operations. That's like giving to your annual stewardship, to your college's annual fund. It supports the operating budget of the institution. So when you take a look at that $2,000 to $5,000 range, does that look like anybody's pledge history or the 2,000 and below? These donors are not being stingy. They're widely committed. The average high net worth philanthropically active donor regularly supports up to 15 different causes. So part of what you need to do is differentiate yourself from that large group. Now notice there's still a very worthwhile percentage of six-figure gifts and above. 5% gave either $100,000 or more. Anybody who's tried to be an A+ student knows that that top 5% takes work and persistence. Luckily, you have things working in your favor. These are some of the internal motivations reported by donors about why they give. Overwhelmingly, personal values affect their giving. Now, you'd like to think that people of faith their personal values are informed by their faith, which comes in a distant second, but the strongest second in the bunch. Notice that obligation and legacy tend to drop down a little more. That's reflecting the demographic shift I've already mentioned. You've got some external motivators as well. Overwhelmingly, your donors were very clear that what they do has to have an impact. They're very motivated if you can show them the difference that their gifts make. This is key, and we're going to talk a lot about it during this webinar. There are a few other things that you want to take into consideration. Their sense of financial security. This is something that you can't really do a lot about. If the economy is bad, your giving is going to decline. Giving in the past is a key indicator. It's a famous fundraising maxim that your best donors are your current donors. And it's also a maxim that if you've got them for 3 years, you've got them for life. So if you're new to fundraising, what this graph tells you is that you're going to have to wait in line. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to manage that. Most major donor prospects have a strategy, and they have a budget for their charitable giving. And you're going to need to find out where you fit in that strategy and what your allocation is in the budget. Finally, I want to mention efficiency, because this is one of the overwhelming reasons that donors stop giving. If they feel their money is not being well used, you will lose them. The way to let them know what's going on and control your destiny is actually a really great way. You thank them. You show them the difference that their gift is making. Strangely, The organizations that have taken over the charitable marketplace get this really well. Make-A-Wish Foundation serves terminally ill children, and they're in airports everywhere because they want you to donate your frequent flyer miles to fly children for medical care. I started a game a couple years ago of cataloging all the ads in airports. I travel a lot. And Make-A-Wish had, for a while, a businesswoman in her suit with her briefcase and the logo said, "My miles have the power to grant a wish." Notice they don't talk about the sick child. They talk about the power of your gift, what it will do. Make-A-Wish falls under public service benefit. Its giving to that sector has increased 3% over the last 10 years. Care.org is another one that's frequently in airports and also addresses many of the things that Christianity serves. Here is an ad that talks about her power to change the world. Care.org feeds the hungry and lifts people up out of poverty. This is the fastest growing sector in nonprofits, up 6.9%. This is Nothing But Nets, similar to the Nets for Life that Episcopalians use. Their message is drumbeat consistent. Nets save lives. Giving to healthcare is up 4.6%. You begin to see where that 15% market share has gone that giving has lost over the last 10 years. Look at the verbs in those messages. Have the power, change the world, save a life. Even some of the nouns like power and life imply verbs. This is really important because the ad offers a chance to make a difference. They say that the things the donors do will have an impact, and this is what the impact looks like. Now, I've got a picture of Heifer International up here because they're my favorite example of how you do this. Heifer International tells you that $500 will buy a cow, and that cow will change the economy of a village in this way. It's what we call quantified impact, and it makes it easy for a donor to understand the difference that their gift will make. But you know, you don't have to take my word for it. In preparation for this webinar, we asked a sampling of bishops to give us a first name and an email address of 2 donors who had given six-figure gifts or higher, and 2 donors who had the capacity to do that but had not yet made a gift. And we constructed a blind survey so that the donors had complete privacy and confidentiality, and asked them about the largest gift that they had made and what had motivated them. And this is what they had to say. I believe strongly in the vision the gift financed and its potential to provide long-term benefits to the diocese and the community. Notice the role of belief here. That's key. We wish to help the institution be a better place. That's the desire to change things, to have an impact, which another donor was extremely explicit about. The most important part of our gift was the direct impact. So that's a lot to take in. I'm going to pause for a minute for questions. I noticed that Glenn Mitchell from Canada says that 41% of giving still goes to religion in Canada. You're in better shape than we are. That's great. Well, I wonder what the trend is, Glenn. While people are typing in questions, maybe, Glenn, you can type in if you know whether the trend is going up or down. I have a couple people typing. I'm going to pause just a minute, and then we're going to move on to a poll. Okay, the trend is down in Canada as well. So I'm going to still be able to take questions, but we're going to move to a poll, because those always take a little bit of time. While you're typing questions, I'm going to ask Leslie to move this poll onto the screen. You've got some characteristics of your donors. There we go. Now, good. If you're new to this, annual giving refers to the appeal that helps support your operating budget. If you've got special appeals that would otherwise to support, say, camp scholarships, but otherwise those scholarships would come out of your diocesan budget, that still counts. That's why we have appeals for special projects or ministries down there. Are you all seeing the results here? Some of you have no annual program at all. A few people have personal visits to donors. That's really good. It's really good. And email appeals. An interesting factoid about email appeals is that 50% of people who give online prefer to do so after receiving a letter. And in the church, we've gotten so conscious of paper consumption that we've tended to cut out direct mail and paper newsletters. You're actually cutting off a great resource there. 50% of people will get that letter, put it on their desk, and then when you send the email to remind them, then they will give. So this is an interesting spread. It looks like most of the highest percentage of participation with an annual appeal has direct mail and some meetings with donors and special appeals projects. Great, great. The reason you have these kinds of programs harks back to that maxim I was telling you about your best donors are your current donors. This is why universities and hospitals have annual funds at all, is because they're using them to identify and train up their major donors. If you don't have an annual fund, we're going to show you how to set one up. And I think we are ready for that to go away now. Thank you, Leslie. Great. Here we go. If you don't have an annual fund, as I said, we're going to tell you how to find your donors. If you have an annual fund, you are ahead of the game. Overwhelmingly, dioceses find the challenge of fundraising is that people think of church as the place where they park it in the pew on Sunday morning. A diocese is at least 1 degree removed from the most committed donor that you've got. And my favorite example of this is anytime I go into a diocesan office to work with them, I'll ask an employee to tell me about their church. And they'll run on and on about the great sermons and the great formation and the fellowship and the singles group, and I'll just let them run on until they run out of gas, and never once will they mention the bishop for whom they work. And that's right there in the diocesan office. So it's very tempting when you in the diocesan office are trying to stimulate people to give to the diocese. It's hard to be patient with the fact that people don't understand what a diocese does. Remember how easy it is to focus on your own parish. What that means is anytime you can speak directly to your donors, you want to take that opportunity and close that gap between the parish and the diocese as a focus. So use your annual fund to communicate your vision, not just ask for money. Remember that donor's first comment, I believe strongly in the vision. That's what you want to instill in your potential donors. You do that by telling stories of impact. Just the way Jesus wrapped theological truths up in a story that people could remember about a specific person or situation, you want to wrap up what you do in stories about specific congregations and programs that make a difference in your diocese. We tend to talk about the mission of the diocese and the Episcopal Church in sort of broad, vague terms. And I was lucky enough to get a potential donor to give me some feedback on one of those conversations. And here's what he had to say. I do not know what the core mission of the diocese is, other than to oversee all of the churches in the diocese and train new clergy members. Thus, I see no case for investment. What's remarkable about this conversation is it came from a man who attended an event where the bishop talked about the mission of the diocese at a parish that had received not one but 2 grants from the diocese. When we told the story of what those 2 grants accomplished, volunteers from other parishes that had received no grants at all became animated and started talking about similar stories. So when you tell a story about a specific benefit, then people can relate to how that has an impact. You're also going to want to build relationships, and talking about specific things can do, this means literally identifying your most faithful donors and visiting with them personally. You are going to want to talk to them specifically about their values. Remember, we talked about giving is motivated by their values and their passions. Your annual fund also is a great way to identify new donors. As you build relationships with those donors who are repeat donors, you go and visit them, get to know them. Those longtime donors will bring their friends. They will invite other people to participate in what you're doing. I've seen this. It's true. Now, if you're starting from scratch, let's say you have no database, no annual fund, my first words to you are take heart. You are not alone. Even places that have a database find that they aren't reaching all the Episcopalians in their diocese. So it's always a project. There's always room for growth. These are some things that you can do that will start building connections and identifying people's passions. They won't necessarily identify their capacity. We'll talk about that later. But I must say that all the capacity in the world will do you no good if there's no passion there in the first place. So you can start with a special appeal. I like to call these the gateway drug to giving. Focus on a particular part of your ministry, say work with the homeless or seminary and support, and send out an appeal just for that particular ministry. It's easy to show impact, and it begins to gather people who would like to support the church beyond their own walls. Diocesan institutions, and we have a couple of you all on today. These organizations such as Episcopal Charities, Episcopal Schools, companion relationships with other dioceses, these are places where volunteers can build leadership roles. These help you identify people who understand the Episcopal Church beyond the walls of their own congregation. And quite frankly, Episcopal institutions often have better impact stories than a diocese does. If you're serving the homeless, you can tell a story about a particular mother who was on the street, who you took into transitional housing, helped to get a job, put the children in school, and now she's self-supporting. That's a great impact story as an example. Another thing that I highly commend, frankly, just from a pastoral and relationship building point of view, is keep a running tally of people that you meet when you as diocesan employees are out in the diocese. Is there somebody particularly well organized and excellent managing a transition in a particular congregation? How great would that be to send a note saying, dear Joan, Canon transition, was very impressed with the process that you are running at St. Swithin's. I wish you well in your search for a new rector. Similarly, ask rectors for input. Every time your bishop goes on a visitation, call the rector beforehand and say, who's doing really good work in your congregation? Who should I be holding up to the congregation when I'm there on Sunday? I tell you, rectors would love to be copied or blind copied on an email to someone saying, you're doing great work setting up the food pantry at St. Edward. Good news always travels well. Ministry days and workshops are kind of a mixed bag. The plus side is they're already structured into your diocesan activities. And people who self-select have already identified themselves as understanding the church beyond the walls of their congregation. On the other hand, there's almost no way to gauge their level of commitment or their level of capacity. To gauge capacity, you do have some tools at your disposal, one of which, frankly, is Google. Do not overlook the value of Googling a person's name in conjunction with, say, their alma mater to see if they show up in the annual report. There are various services that will run what's called a wealth scan. Some of these are Wealth Engine, DonorScape, Blackbaud, and they use public documents, again, that are available through Google if you're able to do that kind of granular search. They'll use public documents to assign a capacity and propensity to give score to a large called a wealth scan. There are numerous services that will help you identify potential capacity in your donor list. Some of these are Wealth Engine, DonorScape, Blackbaud, and for somewhere between 20 and 40 cents a name, you can submit a spreadsheet of your database, and these services will use public information to aggregate as much data about each individual and assign them a capacity score and a propensity to give score. They'll also come back with a lot of other data that you really need a professional to help you sort through. Nevertheless, this is a good place to start if you're just starting out or if you really don't know your donors in your diocese. You want to think of it as a fishing expedition. It is by no means a solid place to start. It is a place to start. It is by no means a solid commendation. Donors, for instance, with very common names will turn up a false positive because other people's giving will be aggregated to their names. Very, very savvy donors who have high wealth often have that wealth secured anonymously, so they don't show up on the scans at all. That said, I've used this with dioceses a number of times, and rectors have found quiet millionaires sitting in the back pew of their congregation that they didn't know. And that's one of the ways that you can inspire cooperation with a rector is to offer to share that information with them. I'm going to move ahead now. Once you've identified some donors and you've got a sense of their passions and interests, or that they are interested at all, you need to involve them. There's a high correlation between involvement and giving. Before you run out and start setting up meetings with these potential donors, first make sure you've clarified your mission. Remember the donor who eventually did become a donor, who said, I don't know what the mission of the diocese is, which means I see no case for support. You want to take a lesson from those nonprofits I showed you earlier who cast their vision in terms of clear, simple verbs. This is going to come in handy when you get to those stories of impact because verbs communicate what it is you're actually doing. Next, you want to make sure that you've got measurable goals. Again, look at how those nonprofits were able to rise above the noise of other nonprofits by creating understandable, quantifiable goals. $500 buys a cow. That cow changes the economy of a village. You're going to develop those quantifiable goals through your stories of impact. That's exactly what that cow story is, a story of impact that shows the difference that those goals make. Now, how does that translate to a diocese? Let's say a measurable goal is seminarian support. They graduate with so much debt that it's really hard to keep them. So an impact story could be a highly talented seminarian that you lost to a higher paying job and you want to prevent that again. Or conversely, if you've already got that program up and running, which is always better to attract support, to tell a story about a really, really talented seminary couple who were able to graduate debt-free and return to the diocese and begin building a Spanish-speaking mission, let's say. Participation, finally, is huge. Overwhelmingly, major donors give the largest gift to where they have logged the most volunteer hours or where they've served in an oversight capacity, such as a board member. And for a number of reasons, involving your major donors in this meaningful way is often the biggest challenge for a diocese. So let's talk about that. Remember I said six-figure gifts take time? This is why. Donors at this level are very intentional about their giving. They have a strategy and a budget. And you need to take the time to learn what that strategy is and where you sit in their budgetary priorities. Now, the good news is that the strategy, as you saw, got developed out of their personal values, and you like to hope that the mission of the diocese aligns somewhat with the personal values of the people that you are serving. So you are ahead of the game there. What you saw in the donor comment is that your donors take real pleasure in putting their resource in the service of things that they believe in. So you need to find out how your mission aligns with their passion. I've seen that happen so many times. I'm going to take a little minute and talk about that. I have seen a bishop talk about what seems like an accessibility project that seemed very uninspiring to everyone in the room except the woman who had survived polio as a child. She walked up afterwards and funded the entire project. I've seen people test very low at the beginning of the capital campaign, and when something that they care about intensely is put in front of them as an opportunity, the amount that they are willing to invest in the capital campaign increases exponentially. So aligning yourself with their passions and your mission is key. Overwhelmingly, this takes time. A long, fruitful relationship will help you develop those things. My favorite example of this was actually a rector who got a $300,000 gift from a couple that wasn't even a member of his congregation. And when I said, how did you do that? He said, well, it's all started about 10 years ago. 10 years. So this is a particularly challenging area for dioceses because people are scattered. They think in terms of their parish per church, and often they don't really know what a diocese does. So here are some ways that you can think about involving them. Do not overlook the benefits of a power breakfast. These donors are often highly scheduled, busy people, and you just are going to have to put it on your calendar to stay in touch with them every 4 to 6 months. A variation on that theme is to have luncheons for people of similar skill sets and on similar schedules. I worked a diocesan campaign for debt reduction, where it turned out that most of our major donor prospects were, wait for it, bankers. So that's definitely a banker's lunch. You can take a cue from your alma maters and from some of the camps on here. I know St. Columba has a council of advice or a visitors committee. These are boards that are essentially training grounds for board members and major donors. They're invited to gather once or twice a year. You ask them for input on upcoming projects. And while you'll get some good knowledge that way, you're also building relationships and identifying passions. Nothing hooks somebody like trying to decide where they're going to build the next bunkhouse. And as you move the little design of the bunkhouse all over the campus map, people begin to imagine what life at camp will look like, and they become invested. The other side of the coin, diocesan boards and financial institutions, these are great places to involve people with high capacity. Wealthy people aren't necessarily good wealth managers, but they are often more sophisticated than the average person who runs for diocesan council because they've always done church groupie kinds of things. It's a little bit harder in this case to stuff your diocesan council with high net worth individuals because often they have to run. They're elected at convention and things like that. So building those relationships during those power breakfasts, talent lunches, that sort of thing, is where you begin to identify who would be willing to run and then ask them. Again, prospect research is something that you can use in this area as kind of a last resort if you have no toehold on where a potential donor's interest may lie. Then prospect research will often indicate where else they have given, what other boards they sit on, and you'll get a sense of where their passions may lie. Okay, so let's take a little poll now to see if anybody has already identified their high capacity people and involved them in some of your diocesan activities, your endowment or fiscal boards. Legacy Society, if you are new to the concept, is the organization that honors and promotes planned gifts, either to the diocese or to your parish. Great. Okay. Not coincidentally, about half of the people responding have their high capacity people on their endowment board or their governing board. This is good policy, not just because it's cultivating your donors, but I've also seen financially unsophisticated boards make some pretty disastrous decisions around mortgages and financing and that sort of thing. So use the fiscal talents of your leadership the same way you would put a beautiful singer in the choir. Honor what they bring to the table. Okay, you've got a fair number of people who also say that their high capacity parishioners are unknown to them. We're going to talk a little bit about, we've talked about how to identify them. So you've got some place to start now. Now I'm going to talk about what you do once you've found them. So we can leave that poll. Can you take that off the screen, Leslie, before we go to the next slide? Thank you. Staying in touch. Now, early on, I said you don't need to take notes, and then we all got distracted by the sound difficulties. This is a place to start writing things down. Major gift work is not just a matter of wealth and relationship, although that's very important. It's also a matter of the calendar. Here's what your competition is doing. The average university major gifts officer is assigned between 50 and 100 major donor prospects to follow every year. They collect data on these people, like their professional lives, so they know when they're going to get a promotion, the ages of their children, so they know when they're going off to college, when they move, so they know if they've sold a high-value home. These major gifts officers are required to make X number of contacts or visits per year and to update the donor on the progress of the institution, their favorite programs, that sort of thing. These contacts are called touches on the donor, and it is calendared. Part of every major gift officer's evaluation is how many touches they made. And that's what you're competing against in terms of keeping your mission in front of your donor. Now, if that feels like a lot of work, hang in here with me. It's going to get easier. These major gift officers aren't just making phone calls and visits so they can add up their tally and get a good evaluation. Each prospective donor is coded according to their ability and their affinity and their interest. Where I was trained, we just used A, B, and C, and it works like this. A C-coded donor has capacity and a basic affinity. So that would be a high net worth individual who's an Episcopalian and shows up to church pretty regularly. A B level meets the first two criteria plus some involvement. So high net worth Episcopalian who serves on an advisory board or participates in some diocesan activity, like they made their first visit to a companion diocese. An A-level donor has all those criteria, plus they have expressed interest in a particular ministry. So that's high net worth Episcopalian who comes to a prison ministry day and afterwards says, that's incredible, I want to get involved. In industry language, an A-level scenario is ready for an ask. And we're going to cover how you do that in just a little bit. But I want to pause here to point out something incredibly important. As a fundraiser, I'm telling you that you have to have these deliberate conversations with people about money because that's how you're going to raise significant gifts. But as a Christian and as the spouse of a clergy person, I'm telling you that people are dying to have this conversation, and they want to have it with you or with the bishop or with their rector. They tell me this, and they tell it to me often. Money in large quantities is both powerful and morally complex. And if you don't believe me, try getting a bill through Congress without a paid lobbyist. But because Christians have gotten a little weird about how we discuss money, it's rare for your donors to say something like, I'd like to have a conversation about the moral ramifications of my financial decisions. So just as you've been trained to watch for those telltale comments that let you know someone's having a pastoral crisis, like issues with their health or their family, you want to watch for comments that tell you someone's having a formational issue around money. Here are some real-life examples. One woman said, once this gift is publicized, we're going to have to get an unlisted number and turn on the burglar alarm. A man said to me, we're tired of people treating us like an ATM machine. Another donor walked up to his bishop and said, I just gave X amount to the bishop's appeal. That man is telling his bishop that he wants to discuss giving and money. Interesting, every one of the donors who responded to the survey that I quoted to you earlier had had a conversation with the bishop or their rector about giving. So while you're having those authentic, theologically demanding conversations that are required by your role in the church, you are also coincidentally moving those people from C level to B level to A level. So remember I said stay with me? This is important. You have an incredible edge over the symphony, the hospital, graduate school, all those things. Your donors expect you to meet them at the most vulnerable and authentic intersection of their lives. However difficult those conversations may feel at the time, your donors really do want to trust you. And anyone who goes to church nowadays really is doing it out of their own accord. I see some questions popping up. We've got a question about prospect research tools and regional differences. And actually, this is probably a good place to stop and talk about those. The prospect research tools I mentioned, Suzanne, or our Wealth Engine, DonorScape, and Blackbaud. There are probably others. Those are just the three that I'm familiar with working with. And Fred asked if there are regional differences in terms of giving percentages. And yes, Province 4 of the Episcopal Church, that's the Southeast, has the highest giving percentage, and New England tends to have the lowest giving to, and that's giving to religion. I don't know about others. Recently, I did see a study you can get online about the most philanthropically active states versus the least philanthropically active states. And Hawaii, if you are still on here, I want to say Hawaii was third on the list of most philanthropically active states. So there are regional differences, and you want to adapt to those. Now, once you've developed this relationship, you're going to need to stay in touch. A good benchmark is you want as many contacts, those touches on the donors, as I've talked about, you want as many significant contacts as there are zeros in the app. So $100,000 gift, you're going to be in touch with that person 6 times, not just talking about the gift, but talking about the program, their interests, and that sort of thing. And then you apply that same metric to the number of times you follow up to say thank you. Once you've received the gift, you want to stay in touch by sending a letter, sending an update, having the person who's that young seminarian, for instance, who's just come back and started your Hispanic congregation, maybe that person could write a note saying, I know you're interested in Spanish-speaking ministries. Here's what's going on here. You want to say thank you at least 7 times. So there were the questions. That was the question slide. I got ahead of ourselves. I'm going to keep moving because we're running out of time and people are going to have to step off. When you're ready to make the ask, here's a handy list of benchmarks. Have you identified their capacity and interest? Have you involved them and asked for their input? Do you know what they're passionate about, and have you connected the gift to that passion? And have you educated them about the impact? If you have, then it's time to make the ask. First and foremost, you need to do this. It will increase your giving between 19 and 41%. You also will overwhelmingly want to send a bishop. In most diocesan situations, if you send what's called a financial peer, that's somebody who can give at the same level and who's equally involved, that person will come back with 50 to 75% less than the bishop will come back with on a major gift ask. So you have to calendar that in with your bishop. Most important of all, you need to focus on the donor, the project, the impact, not your need for the money. So if the person is into liturgy, don't ask them to support a campus ministry project. If they give you the money that one time out of loyalty, it is quite likely the last gift that you will receive. As I said, you want to connect major donors' passions with your project. Let's go back to that campus ministry program. If they're passionate about having young people formed, or they think that that's the ticket to church growth, talk to them about what that would look like. Be clear about the impact. For instance, putting the campus minister at EDU will provide college students with answers to the fundamental theological questions that young people are asking at this age. Then be specific about how they can participate. Say something like, we have calculated the cost of a part-time missioner plus some program funding to be about $50,000. I'd like to ask you to commit to $25,000 for the first year as a matching grant to help me raise the $50,000.
You have been muted. Your microphone has been turned on.
See how you've defined your terms and your amount. Then finally, be silent. Give your person time to consider. Once they've given you an answer, and that answer may be that they need to think about it, it's important to keep the ball in your court. If they say, we need to think about it, you say, of course. Shall I contact you next week, or do you need another week to think about it? I'll contact you. Don't wait for them to contact you in return. Confirm, when they make the gift, confirm the amount and the terms in writing. Send a note that says, thank you for your $25,000 pledge. I understand that you plan to pay it in full by December. This will allow us to begin the ministry project at EZU beginning spring semester, that sort of thing. And then remember to say thank you. My favorite way to do this is by sending a photograph of the treasured ministry. They can put it